We are live, and today we are going to talk a little bit about the Department of Government Efficiency because this is something that I'm getting a lot of questions about from concerned companies and from consultants that are in our program. And what do we expect that is actually going to happen here? Well, here's what I'll tell you. And for those of you that don't know me, I'm Rick Howard. I spent 20 years in the Air Force. About half that time, at the back half, I was acquisitions officer. So I was putting companies on contract for the government as a program manager. I ran branches that did that. And then after retiring, started GovClose, our consulting business, helping companies sell to the government. I've sold to the government, and now our certification program, where we're training sales executives and people that want to start their own freelance consulting businesses. So essentially trying to provide actual training that works to people that want to be involved with government contracting. So how do you really sell to the government? But outside of that, outside of my phone ringing right now, that brings us to the presidential election and what actually happens to government funding when we change over with a new president, with a new administration. That in and of itself can present some small challenges for the contracting office, for the program office, and for the companies working with the government. So I think maybe just taking this from the standpoint of first, if you're selling to the government, if you're a company, if you're a salesperson, what are the times of the year that you need to be thinking about as far as where are things going to slow down for me? How can this affect our business? And the first thing I would tell you is that the fiscal year begins October 1st and ends at the end of September. Okay. And what that means for us, I'm not in the government anymore. What that means for us is that fiscal year money, if there, and there's different kinds of money, just to make this even more complicated, I'm not going to get into that other than to tell you that some types of money are going to have years associated with them. So there might be 1 year money or 3 year money. But often what will happen is a program office will plan on maybe putting your company on contract or another company to do whatever it is, accounting services. Maybe they're buying software, they're pumping it into an aircraft, they're buying commodities, whatever. If they're planning on using, in this case, it's fiscal year 25 right now, fiscal year 25 funds, well, before they can spend that money, they actually have to receive it. So the first thing to think about is in any year, October could be a slow year because my experience is that offices, agencies often have delays in receiving the funding for that year. So that's the first thing, knowing that the beginning of the fiscal year, there could be a delay. Now, when there's a presidential handover, I guess you could say, or maybe there's problems in Congress or just getting budgets approved, there can be a delay that goes even further, right? So you could be delayed into January or February before you actually get the funding you need. So these delays happen all the time, but I expect them, not with every program, but I expect them to some degree every year. And I expect even more of a problem during a presidential election. Now, in this presidential election, we also have what they're talking about is the DOGE rather, right? The Department of Government Efficiency, which first of all, my understanding is this is not going to be an official government agency, right? So this is more of two individuals advising the president on where they can make cuts. Now, this has happened before, actually, during the Reagan administration. President Reagan had appointed a business person to recommend a bunch of different cuts. Most of them weren't implemented. So I will say there is historical precedence here for a president to appoint somebody. And in this case, there were 2,500 recommendations that's the what Musk is recommending here. I'm looking for what President Reagan's, what he authorized during the 1980s. So Peter Gray, so he was a businessman and he was supposed to recommend reforms, and he made 2,500 recommendations for cutting spending, and most of them never implemented. Why is that? Well, because it's very hard to do anything in the government, right? So the president has a certain amount of power to put things through with executive orders and whatnot, but to do something like pass a budget or to cut an agency altogether, this becomes very difficult to do, right? It's one thing to say it, it's another thing to do it. We see this in all elections. What could what could be a little bit different about these cuts? Well, I think the first thing is I would tell everybody, don't worry about your company if you're selling to the government. For the most part, the government keeps on spending, and year over year, the government typically spends more and more, right? So if we look at historical spending, we see the spending going up. We also have, in addition to this DOGE office, this Department of Government Efficiency, we have a lot of things happening in the world that are going to drive spending, right? So what's going to happen with the war in Ukraine, right? What's going to happen with China and the Pacific and some of the different areas of interest that we have around the world? The Department of Defense spends a tremendous amount of money, and I would expect that funding to go up even during this administration where they want to make cuts. Now, if you're involved in something like environmental, there you may want to be a little bit more concerned. I wouldn't be surprised to see cuts in environmental spending because the president and some of the people have indicated that they want to make those kind of cuts. And also, by the way, before I even get into what Elon Musk and his counterpart are recommending as far as the DOGE is concerned, just thinking about this presidency versus the last one, remember, we've already had a President Trump administration in office. And so I can tell you that if you're a small business, both President Trump and President Biden, we know what they've done because we've already seen it. They both are promoting small business. They both want more contracts with small business. They just go about it in different ways, right? So what does President Trump's administration do? Well, they're more in getting rid of regulation and making it a little bit easier to sell to the government. The Biden administration, what we saw is an increase in things like the certifications and set-asides that the government has, right? So what I mean by that is, so if you're not familiar, the U.S. government is the single biggest purchaser in the world. They are required to put small businesses on contract, or 23% is the mandated allocation by SBA. Most agencies actually exceed that, not all of them. And by the way, it does change per agency, but roughly it's 23%. And then there are further set-asides within the small business mandatory spending, which are like 8A, so that's a business that essentially is part of it's not even based on minority class, it's based on if you can prove that you're part of a group of people that have been disenfranchised or experienced hardship, and there's a bunch of parameters associated with that. You can apply for the 8A certification. Woman-owned small business, service disabled, veteran-owned small business, and HubZone, they all have percentages associated with them of contracts that will go. So the Biden administration increased the number of, or the percentage of how many contracts should go to these type of set-asides and certifications. So they both wanted to increase small business contracts, but they just want to do it in different ways. So based on what we've seen in the past, I would expect to see, as far as the small businesses are concerned, I would see the Trump administration trying to make this a little bit easier, right? So, and I know there's a wish list of some of you guys out there about what could we see. Hey, Luke, what could we see as far as some of the policies or what do you think President Trump is actually going to try to remove to make it easier for you? Now, the wish list would include things like, hey, what about CMMC? What about FedRAMP, right? So if any of you are involved with software and trying to get it in the cloud, or just selling to the government, and now you're experiencing the upcoming CMMC requirements, a lot of companies would like to see that go away. I don't know that it's going to go away, but we'll see. You never know. There are a list of things that Elon Musk has put out there as far as what they want to get rid of and what they want to start targeting. So they were looking at $500 billion in spending that is unauthorized by Congress. Now, I know there's some other figures out there, but I'm just going to go through some of the data points that are in front of me right now. And what they're looking at is or I should say the biggest source of things they want to target were expired authorizations and I'm not saying they want to cut all of these things, but I want to give you a list of some of them, just so you knew what was on the chopping block and what they were going to try to target. Now, one of the things that would fall into the bucket that I just talked about is veterans healthcare, which of course is near and dear to me, but they didn't specify that they actually wanted to target veterans healthcare. So, and I wouldn't imagine any administration would actually go after that except to make it better. So I wouldn't worry about that. Now, what they did talk about were things that may or may not surprise you. So the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, they get $535 million a year. They are working at things like international organizations and a lot of over $1 billion in grants that are being given to these international organizations. So that's something else they want to target. I believe they said I'm reading it. Planned Parenthood is something else that they would categorize as a progressive group. So those are just three of the things that were specifically pointed out. But if we really want to take a look at the list of federal programs that don't have authorizations, well, then that expands the list a little bit. And so we can look at that. And you want to just think to yourself, what are you selling to the government, or what company do you work for? And do we think that any targets or any targeted reductions in these categories could affect your company, and whether it's winning your first contract or continued spending? Before I read that list, I will tell you this, and I just did a couple of posts on this, which is this aside, right? The DOGE aside, if you go and read any information on SpaceX, Elon Musk's biographies, we know that there are certain things that he has a problem with in government contracting. And in fact, I share some of his critique on some of them. One of the things he doesn't like are the cost plus fixed fee, cost plus contracts that the government will put out there. And what's a cost plus contract? Well, the government has a lot of different ways of putting companies on contract, right? There are sole source contracts, right? There are fixed price contracts. And there is something called cost plus, which essentially means that if a company, and this is what a lot of the big defense contractors have with the government, which is they'll have these big contracts paying them millions, if not billions of dollars, and they'll be over time. And they will charge the government whatever it costs. So if they have expenditures that go to a certain point, that doesn't eat into their profits, because that cost plus is their profit. They get the profit no matter what. So if the government says, hey, I want you to build us, I don't know, a 5G RF receiver and transmitter, blah, 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 for this base. I'm just making this up off the top of my head. Well, if you had a firm fixed price contract, you want to build that as efficiently as possible. You want it to work, but you're going to be looking at cutting costs where you can, not putting money into things that aren't going to work, because the remainder of that after your expenses is your profit, right? But for these companies on the big cost plus contracts, they're almost incentivized to spend more money, not make the cuts, and keep these contracts just going longer and longer. Because at least if you read some of the biographies of Elon, or have heard him in some of the interviews that he's given, the incentive is for them to just keep these contracts lumbering along, not make the cuts. And by the way, they're spending our tax dollars, right? So that's their profit. All right. So that's their profit, is this plus part of the contract. And I could tell you that I've had my own experience as an acquisitions officer working with some of these companies where even they have a proprietary lock on a weapon system. We're trying to get technology into it, but they don't want the small business to get their technology into it, even though this was designed to help. And I'm giving you one of 100 examples. Even though this would help the warfighter, the military man or woman on the other side that would benefit from that technology, they not only do they not want to bring in a technology that they don't own or share profits with another company, but they also know, because they're on these huge lumbering contracts, that they can just wait out the military officer, for instance, that's in charge of the program, because he's going to, or she is going to PCS or move on to a different job in 2 years. And the way they do that is they have an army of lawyers that take a look at things, and they can make the bureaucracy so difficult that trying to get something done really is like pushing a boulder uphill. So I think what we're going to see big picture is, in addition to targeting some of the programs that we already talked about today, hey, Jeff, is that they're also going to be looking at, I think, some of the big defense companies and the big government contractors that are on those cost plus contracts. So if I was in one of those companies, I would be concerned about what type of contracts are they going to be looking at putting us on. So, and I guess the example would be, and by the way, we're starting to see for the first time, some companies actually being able to compete with the big defense contractors that we know about. There's about 5 of them that have been consolidating a bunch of different companies and winning everything. But then recently we have some other companies emerge, like SpaceX, like Palantir, like, I don't remember the name of this company, Palmer Lucky's, was it Anduril? Those watching, I don't remember, but I think it is Anduril, but Braun company, essentially. We're starting to see some of these emerge. And I know with SpaceX, they would do the firm fixed price contracts. And basically that's how they're able to do things more efficiently. They're not incentivized to go longer. And I think in some cases, those make a lot of sense. So enough about that. I don't want to bore you to tears, but I think cost plus contracts will see and get some scrutiny. Now, some of the programs with expired funding that I'm looking at, and I'm not saying that they're going to cut any of these, but here are some of and these numbers are in billions that I'm about to read you, right? So veterans healthcare, 119 billion. I don't think they're going to be cutting that. I think they'll try to improve healthcare there. We'll see. Opioid treatment and drug developments, 48 billion. State Department Foreign Affairs programs, 38 billion. Housing assistance, 37 billion. Justice Department, domestic violence, 35 billion. Education Department, K-12. There's been a lot of talk about education, the Department of Education. What do we think he could do there? Sipping my coffee. I'd like to know your thoughts. If you have any interesting ideas about what we're going to see spending wise, you could throw them in the comments. Just going through some of these other programs that are on that expired funding list. Head Start, 12 billion. Some national defense programs, workforce development, the PACT Act, child care funding, higher education funding, 8 billion. FAA, 7 billion. Immigration and Nationality Act, 7 billion. Energy policy, 7 billion. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, 6 billion. State housing grants. There's one called the Helping Families Save Their Homes Act. And then there's 3 billion in a combination of things like water infrastructure, healthcare, and other spending. So that's what we have. We have a lot of things that they're targeting. There's a lot of talk right now. It's much harder to do anything. And Richard just left a comment. I received VA disability compensation. Do you see any cuts there? Richard, no, I don't think that's going to happen. I also receive VA disability. Again, most of the politicians in this administration is pro-military, but they're also pro-efficiency. So I think what we're going to see is if they look at the VA at all, it's going to probably be, can we make things more efficient? Can we actually help the warfighter and the military man, woman with the disabilities, with the healthcare afterwards? Because look, I mean, the VA has been criticized for years about how they're helping vets or not helping vets. I think they do a pretty good job. They can always improve. I wouldn't worry about your disability benefits. It's not to say anything can happen, but I don't think that's going to be a target. They certainly aren't talking about targeting that type of funding. Look, the government does spend a ton of money. And how are we going to actually spend in a more conservative way? I mean, this is something that we have to look at. But I do want everyone to understand that the history of spending in this country, overspending, and in some instances of corruption, which we've heard about. But the government contracting process, this has gone back over 200 years. In fact, if we look at, I've got a book that you probably won't be able to find it. It's called The History of Government Contracting. I mean, going back to the Revolutionary War, we have literally letters from George Washington and the founding fathers that are incensed by either corrupt government officials or government agencies spending too much, or not agencies at the time, but groups within the government spending too much, or by the companies selling to the government, not delivering what they're supposed to, taking too long to do it. This goes back in time. Here's what happens. This is the cycle. The government spends a ton of money, especially during wars. Then things calm down, and then the politicians get involved and they say, we're going to fix it. And a lot of times the politicians actually have no idea how the contracts are actually put in place, but they run their campaigns on, we're going to fix things. They make a bunch of policies, and this is every party. This isn't Democrat, Republican. This happens over and over again. Politicians come in and they make policies to fix things. And what those policies end up doing is it makes it harder to put companies on contract because we want oversight. It makes it also harder for the companies that are on contract because they have now lot of paperwork, bureaucracy. They have to prove different things. So it makes the timeline longer, it makes things more difficult. And then I think it was Jim Nagel. Jeff, you found it already. No? Yeah, Jim Nagel. I've got it on my shelf. It's really, if you're a geek for government contracting, that is the book to read. But yeah, so the politicians make it harder. And then we go to war again. And then we realize we can't put things on contract fast enough to actually win the war and to do what we need to do. So then what happens? Well, it's a new round of policies and things that are implemented so we can spend faster, put companies on contract, get what we need to, innovate, and then somebody on both sides usually does something wrong. And that's what we hear about. When we hear about in the press, when we hear about a general officer helping one of the big defense contractors win a contract because he's invested in them or he's going to get a job, or vice versa, we see corruption from a company. That's what we hear about in the news. But in reality, these days, it's actually very, very because of how much oversight there is. But this cycle of policymaking, the policy is making things harder and lumbering, and then we go to war and we have to either get rid of policies or reform them or do something in order to buy fast enough to win the fight that we're actually in. This has happened over and over again over the past couple hundred years. So what you get is, and you can look at every war, Abraham Lincoln, look at Civil War. We have a lot of notes and comments from Abraham Lincoln about the government contracting process, right? And so same thing. We finish the Civil War. We're going to fix government contract spending, more policy. World War I, same thing. World War II, same thing. And by the time we get to the 1980s, there were, I think it was over 50,000 pages of policies and federal acquisitions regulations that a contracting officer would actually have to go through to put a company on contract. So I know when a lot of you have commented whenever I say something like it takes 6 to 18 months to win a government contract, that's actually true. Are there exceptions to that rule? Yes. But there are so many policies and things in place to ensure transparency, to ensure that there isn't corruption, and then just a lot of bureaucracy on top of that, mainly due to this self-licking ice cream cone of making policies and going to war and trying to fix things, which creates even more policy and more bureaucracy, that you get to the point where it just takes forever to put someone on contract, and then you got to manage it. It's quite a problem. And then on top of that, you have the good idea fairies, right? So sometimes the good idea that good people have to try to fix things actually maybe 10 years from now makes things worse. One interesting note in all of this is with all of the different ways that the government spends money, the solicitation process, fairness and competition, the certifications, the set-asides, the length of time in making sure that things are fair, the market research phase, all of this. If I have my facts straight, this actually came to be during the space race when, again, we couldn't put things on contract fast. We never would have beat the Russians or anybody else to the moon. So what was developed was this thing called Other Transaction Authority. An Other Transaction Authority, that is an interesting way of selling to the government, and it's being utilized big time right now. And over the past 10 years, this has grown and grown. But first, it was just NASA, so they could buy things. So basically, that Other Transaction Authority alleviates a lot of these federal acquisitions regulations and is the ability to put people on contracts super fast. And today, we see this exact same thing being utilized by a lot of, and I'm more and most familiar with the Department of Defense offices that are doing this. But if you look at things like DIU, if you look at some of I would call them rapid technology development offices within the government branches that are setting up to try to look like Silicon Valley offices. What comes to mind is DIU. You got AFWorks, SoftWorks. There's a Vulcan system you can check out. A lot of cases they're using Other Transaction Authority, not always, but some cases, and then taking use of the super process. Only to say that there have been a lot of ways that the government has tried to either speed things up or to fix things in the acquisitions process. Now, spending has always been an issue. So yes, I'm sure that there will be some shakeup here. I think some of those things will be really good. I think some of them may backfire because historically they seem to. Some of this will create more policy and bureaucracy because historically that's what we've seen. So we've seen this time and time again. We've seen this for hundreds of years. It's just how successful will they be at actually reducing spending, getting rid of some of the bureaucracy and regulation? That's really the question on the table. But I think for the most part, you don't have to be nervous about the fact that if your business is government contracting, anything is going to happen, but more spending and more opportunity. That's what I see. You may need to pivot, right? Because things do change. So there may be some new ways to sell to the government. And I look at that as an opportunity. If the government gets rid of something that you're selling, well, look at it as an opportunity. And instead of being nervous about it, think, well, where else can I apply this? If you are in one of the environmental friendly sectors, right? Wind, solar, would I expect spending to be less in those areas? I would. But that doesn't mean you're out of the game, certainly. And by the way, even if you are in one of those sectors, look, Elon Musk has a solar company, if I'm not mistaken, right? He sells the solar batteries. He's got the solar roof tiles. I don't own them, but he has a vested interest there. And that's the other thing. This is not an official agency, right? These are two businessmen advising the president on some things that they want to do. So we'll see what happens there. If you have questions, by the way, you can throw them in here and I'll hit them before I jump off. Is there room to smooth out government contracts? If so, how would you solve for these needed allocations? What do you mean by smooth out government contracts? Do you mean to make the process easier to win a government contract? Or do you mean in execution? Once I am on contract, how do we execute that? Right? Because there's a few things going on there. I mentioned CMMC and FedRAMP at the beginning of this. That's something that a lot of companies would like to see either go away forever or at least make it a little bit easier or smoothed out as far as compliance is concerned. So that's something that you may consider. Okay, we're going to take a quick break and then I will be back in 1 minute and 21 seconds. The GovClose certification is generating tremendous results. So 27 years old, you've never worked in government contracting, you've never worked as a consultant, and you just closed your first deal. Is that correct? That's fair. And I got a couple small projects on the side as well. So definitely probably my best investment I've made all year.
It would be my second post on how a cold call landed a 9-figure
government contract.
My name's Gavin Tice.
So my name is Ethan Mart. When I was able to enroll into the GovClose program, it just exceeded all my expectations. It really has provided a lot of valuable learnings and insights that I would not have found on my own.
I was able to get a consulting gig with a software company that currently works with the intelligence community. Hi, I'm Deb Diller Harris.
If you want to learn how to sell to the government, if you want to learn how to start your own consulting business, if you want to learn the skills that you need to go land a 6-figure plus account executive job with big companies selling to the government, the certification program is for you. Head on over to govclose.com. Check out our certification program. Talk to the team. You won't regret it. All right. We're back. I need to take a sip of coffee. So you got to watch an ad if you're still with us. I thought now maybe we could pivot a little bit towards other transaction authority because it's not something I talk about very often. You may be hearing about it for the first time. I think it's great from the business owner's perspective. I think it's great from, sales executive, consultant's perspective, because it's an extremely fast way to sell to the government. Now, how does this work? I'm not going to give you the Defense Acquisitions University definition of this, but what I will say is my experience working with other transaction authority is either through a outfit like Defense Innovation Unit or through consortiums. And these consortiums, this is probably where we are going to see most of the other transaction authority. I'll share my screen here with you guys in a second and show you a list, but essentially these consortiums are usually run by companies. So the companies are going to be on contract by the federal government, and there are going to be topics. So if anyone's familiar with SBI, Small Business Innovative research contracts that are out there, which is another great way, especially for tech companies that are developing something, to get investment from the government. It's easier. Well, I say it's easier. it could be a easier path to your first government contract. We can talk about that in another session. But these other transaction authorities, consortiums, usually what would happen is you go and join the consortium, and then each one is going to have different topics. So depending, I'm looking at some of them now. One of them is biopharmaceutical. One of them is cyberspace, right? So depending on what you're selling, what your company's doing, these consortiums could be a really cool way for you to win one of your first contracts. Let's see if I can go ahead and share my screen here. All right. All right. So this is a website I just pulled up under, if you're familiar with Delta Government, they just a list of consortiums out there. You don't need a membership to see this. You can Google it and find it. But it's showing me all of the different consortiums out there. So depending on what your industry is, let me just read through some of these. America's Data Hub Consortium, Biopharmaceutical Manufacturing Preparedness, Command Control Communications and Cyberspace, Consortium for Energy and the Environment, Countering Weapons of Mass Destruction Consortium. Did you guys even know that this existed, these consortiums existed, and that you may, if you're just going on Sam.gov or just go through your normal sales process, if you're not also referencing these, you may be missing out on some of the opportunities out there. Information Warfare Research Projects. And it looks like that's listed twice. I don't know if that's a mistake or not. Medical CDRN, which is, it's usually chemical countermeasures. Medical Technology Consortium. I'm just going to click on one or two of these just to show you what pops up so you have an idea of actually what you're dealing with if you want to engage in some of these opportunities. Okay, because now when I clicked on that, what I'm getting is actually the consortium website. So it's going to be a company. Like I said, usually it's a company, maybe not always. So you can join the consortium, and what it's going to do is show you some of the opportunities here. Let's see if there's anything available right now. Looks like this one doesn't have any right now. Is it going to give me some of the listed awards? Okay, so this one awarded 31 million production of drug substances, 11 million sterilization capacity for vaccines. So again, this one is focused on pharmaceuticals. I'll go through a couple more of these before I have to end this here in a couple of minutes, just to give you a flavor for those of you guys that aren't doing pharmaceuticals. Let's pick something completely different. How about, let's see, Command Control, Consortium for Command Control Communications in Cyberspace. What does this one look like? Okay, so you can see here's this consortium management group. This one, actually, I want to say that I've been a member of this with another client and gone after some of these. This is going to give you hey, what is another transaction authority? And then it's going to tell you what each of these little sectors do. And this one is for C4ISR. Usually that's command control, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, cyber technology sectors, which covers a lot of ground, right? It covers a lot of different things. It tells you the features there. Yeah, let's see if it has any opportunities posted. Oh, it wants me to log into the portal if I want to actually, of course, if I want to see any of those opportunities. That's okay. This one here, this is the Naval Aviation Systems Consortium. So you can see this is going on and on, right? But if you haven't checked this out, take a look at it. And this is something just on topic. I wonder how the DOGE is going to look at other transaction authority. Is this something that you think is going to increase, or do you think this is something that's going to decrease? Let's see here. Luke has a few things in here. Is that a ton of individuals that don't know the process and therefore less competition? No, that's not necessarily what I think is happening here in other transaction authority. I do think that fewer people know about this. So I think your odds automatically increase depending on the consortium you're looking at, just because you have far less people looking at something like this than you do at Sam.gov. Now, some of these will go through Sam.gov. There'll be a notification there. I really like so don't expect that the people that are going in looking at OTAs don't know what they're doing, because a lot of them are there because they do know what they're doing. Now, I've had success with other clients with DIU. Let me bring that up. I love DIU, Defense Innovation Unit. If you guys haven't seen it before, And look, they have one open solicitation. What I really like about this is, so anybody that's watching that has written a proposal for government contracting, you know how much effort it takes to do that, right? That is a considerable push, right? To write a proposal that's going to win a government contract. But with something like this, so this is for automated, retrainable cyber adversaries for defensive exercises. Now, it's going to give you a lot more information here about like what they're actually looking for. But the submission for one of these typically is either 5 pages or less, like a white paper, 5 pages or less, or a small slide deck. And the whole point is it's much easier to submit on something like this and see if the government's even interested in your idea and your solution before you go through the pain of having to write a proposal and all of that, right? So what happens is, and this happened with me, so I wrote it wasn't even 5 pages, 3 pages, right? Very succinct. Hey, this is how I'm going to answer your solution, and gave them some use cases, past performance, both commercial and with government. And then what happens is if you make it to the next round, then you're invited to either in-person brief or you can brief virtually. And that's going to be a much more in-depth presentation. But now you've made the first cut. So you're much more likely, P1 has gone up. You're much more likely to win that contract. So in this case, I got to go out to Silicon Valley and present there. And then after that, they start narrowing it down and they figure out who is going to go on contracts. That's just a little bit about other transaction authority. I thought that I would show it since we're discussing that. And let's see here. Okay, I thought I was going to be able to get rid of that. Hey guys, I want to wish everybody happy Friday. Have a great weekend. I'm going to cut this off now. But if you are interested in learning more, go to govclose.com. Having great success there. So if you have salespeople and you want them to really trained so they can actually close contracts, this is the place to do it. If you want to start a consulting business, you can go through here, learn the government contracting process that I use and that our students use, and how to start your business and how to sell and what to sell. Or if you're just looking for a sales executive job, this is a great place to take whatever you've done in the past, leverage the government contracting process, and then go out there and really drive results. And that's what I love about this, is that the people going through it are getting results. Okay. And you can get results too. And even if you don't want to go through that, just keep logging into our YouTube channel, subscribe, please share this with people and leave comments. That always helps. And yep, thank you for everyone that joined the call today, and I'll see you next time. Oh, Jeff, before I go, just want to answer your question. Yes, CRM, our CRM right now is only available either to students who go through GovClose, they get it once they're certified, so they can use it with their clients. Or if you hire us to help your company, that usually is going to come with one of my certified advisors who has the CRM. So those are the only 2 ways to use it right now. But maybe that will change in the future if there's enough demand. Thanks again, guys. The GovClose certification is generating tremendous results. So 27 years old, you've never worked in government contracting, you've never worked as a consultant, and you just closed your first deal. Is that correct? That's fair. And I've got a couple small projects on the side as well. So definitely something, probably my best investment I've made all year.
It would be my second post on how a cold call landed a 9-figure
government contract.
My name's Gavin Tice.
So my name is Ethan Martin. When I was able to enroll into the GovClose program, it just exceeded all my expectations. It really has provided a lot of valuable learnings and insights that I would not have found on my own.
I was able to get a consulting gig with a software company that currently works with the intelligence community. Hi, I'm Deb Diller Harris.
If you want to learn how to sell to the government, if you want to learn how to start your own consulting business, if you want to learn the skills that you need to go land a 6-figure plus account executive job with big companies selling to the government, the certification program is for you. Head on over to govclose.com, check out our certification program, talk to the team. You won't regret it.